The educational system in the United States has been linked to white supremacy for a variety of reasons. Here are a few examples. Curriculum and textbooks. The content of textbooks and curriculum has often reflected a Eurocentric perspective, with little attention paid to the contributions of non-white cultures. This can lead to a narrow understanding of history and the world around us that privileges the experiences and achievements of white people while marginalizing or erasing those of non-white people. Standardized testing. Standardized testing has been criticized for being biased against students of color. Some argue that these tests are culturally and linguistically biased, favoring white, middle-class students and putting students from marginalized communities at a disadvantage. This can perpetuate the achievement gap between white students and students of color, which is a hallmark of white supremacy. School funding. Public schools are often funded through property taxes, which means that schools in wealthier areas have more resources than those in poorer areas. Since wealth in the United States is often linked to race, this can create a situation where predominantly white schools have more resources and opportunities than predominantly non-white schools. Discipline policies. Studies have shown that students of color are disproportionately disciplined and punished in schools compared to their white peers, even for the same behaviors. This can contribute to the school-to-prison pipeline, where students are funneled from school disciplinary systems into the criminal justice system. Lack of diverse representation. Teachers and school leaders are often predominantly white, which can lead to a lack of understanding of the experiences and perspectives of non-white students. This can create a hostile environment for students of color, where they may not feel seen or valued in the school community. Overall, the educational system in the United States can be linked to white supremacy because it has historically reflected a Eurocentric perspective, perpetuated an achievement gap between white students and students of color, and reinforced systemic racism through policies and practices that disadvantage students of color. The history of the educational system in the United States has been intertwined with the history of white supremacy and racism. Here are a few examples. Segregation. For much of the country's history, schools were racially segregated, with white students attending separate schools from black and other non-white students. This was enforced by law in many places through Jim Crow segregation, which was designed to uphold white supremacy and maintain racial hierarchies. Native American boarding schools. Native American children were taken from their families and forced to attend boarding schools, where they were forced to abandon their languages and cultures and adopt white American customs. These schools were designed to assimilate Native American children into white American culture and erase their native identities. Eugenics and scientific racism. In the early 20th century, eugenics and scientific racism were popular theories in American academia. Educators and scientists promoted the idea that certain races were superior to others and that white people were the most advanced race. This ideology was taught in schools and contributed to a broader culture of white supremacy. Civil rights era. During the civil rights era, schools became a battleground for desegregation and racial justice. Black students faced violence and resistance when they tried to attend formerly all-white schools, and white supremacist groups like the Ku Klux Klan targeted schools and educators who supported integration. Modern day. While segregation is no longer legal, many schools in the United States remain segregated by race and class. Studies have shown that students of color are disproportionately disciplined and punished in schools, and the achievement gap between white students and students of color remains a persistent problem. Overall, the history of the educational system in the United States has been shaped by white supremacy and racism. While progress has been made in recent decades, there is still much work to be done to create a truly equitable and just education system for all students. Eliminating white supremacy from the educational system in the United States requires a comprehensive and sustained effort to address systemic racism and promote equity and inclusion. Here are some strategies that can be implemented. Curriculum and textbooks. The content of textbooks and curriculum should be revised to reflect a more diverse and inclusive perspective that includes the contributions of non-white cultures. This can be achieved by diversifying the authorship of textbooks and curricula and incorporating diverse perspectives into lesson plans. Hiring and retention. Schools should actively recruit and retain a diverse staff that reflects the racial and cultural diversity of their student body. This can be achieved by creating recruitment pipelines that prioritize diverse candidates and by implementing policies that support the retention of diverse staff. Professional development. Educators should receive ongoing professional development that focuses on cultural competency, anti-racism, and equity. This can help educators better understand the experiences and needs of students from diverse backgrounds and create a more inclusive and supportive learning environment. Discipline policies. Discipline policies should be revised to address the disproportionate discipline of students of color. This can be achieved by implementing restorative justice practices that prioritize community building and repairing harm over punishment. School funding. Schools should receive equitable funding that prioritizes the needs of historically marginalized communities. This can be achieved by implementing policies that redirect funding to schools in low-income neighborhoods and by creating a more equitable distribution of resources. Student voice. Students should be included in the decision-making process for policies and practices that affect their education. This can be achieved by creating student councils and including student representatives on school boards. Overall, eliminating white supremacy from the educational system in the United States requires a collective effort from educators, policymakers, and communities. It requires a commitment to equity and inclusion and a willingness to address systemic racism in all aspects of the educational system.